那这张照片相当的好，你有没有发觉？它的意思是说你在看我吗？对不对？哦，蛮有这个深层的含义啦。那我想我不再多说，接下来就说 it's your speech time, okay, for 1 hour, but whatever you want, and in the end, please have the time for them to ask you questions. Okay? Check.
来，各位们，掌声欢迎。
Well, thank you very much. It is an honor to be here. I'm so grateful to Dr. Lee for the invitation. I'm very grateful to all of you for coming. It's an honor to have such a large crowd and people that are passionate about technology, passionate about big data, passionate about agriculture, passionate about chickens. And it's my first time to Taiwan, so I am very much enjoying the people. You are a very warm culture, and I feel very much at home. Even though I can't understand a lot of the words, I see a lot of smiles and I hear a lot of laughs, and that conversation is universal, and I really have been enjoying that. I am also, I'm a professor at the University of Alberta. I am also the president of the Poultry Science Association. So the mandate of the Poultry Science Association is to disseminate, to inspire the creation of and disseminate knowledge in poultry science. We want to be the most impactful association in the world to do that. We have 3 journals, the journal Poultry Science, Journal of Applied Poultry Research, and we recently acquired the European Poultry Science. We are 80% of the articles that are submitted for publication in poultry science come from Asia. So we decided we want to reach out to our Asian colleagues and get to know you better and to interact with you and to also provide opportunities for students to present their work, their research in a scientific forum. So we are going to be holding our very first Pacific Rim Scientific Conference in October in Macau. Oops, I guess I need to change one setting. October 13 to 16 in Macau. And we also have our meetings, we often have symposia. So we like to have a group of presentations on this particular topic. If something, I know that there are some, who's a chicken person in the room or a poultry person? Yeah? Don't be shy. Raise your hand way up, because I love it. Okay, excellent. And how many of you are scientists? Yeah? Okay, awesome. So we invite you to just scan this QR code. If there's a topic that you would like to develop a symposium on, we will be evaluating those symposia at the April meeting. So we would love to engage with Taiwan in this meeting as well. Oh. Okay.
各位啊，它多大只你知道吗？在世界上有一个叫 Poultry Science Association， 它是现任的主席啊，现任的总裁，现任的第1号人物就对了。但是他只有当1年，他们的系统是这样，1年后换别人，所以他现在是当任的。所以他现在呢也想到亚洲，所以这里已经都定好时间了，10月份到澳门。那我也问他，澳门就没有鸡啊，对不对？哪有养鸡的？那你为什么跑去澳门？所以你就知道他们的资讯是跟我们是有强烈的落差啦。但是他们已经选好了，我们就不要影响他。所以各位，你只要写一写，东西啊，文章准备好，就给我也可以啦，给他也可以啦，好不好？我们来弄一个台湾的 section， 那我们一群人过去看看他这个国际组织在干什么。 他们的会员有2000个在全球，不是只有在美国、加拿大而已，欧洲、中南美洲都有，所以去那边可以看，你要跟国际做对接连结，我觉得这是一个蛮好的机会，而且又在亚洲，就在澳门来办，也不会太远，对我们台湾来讲。那里面有很多个节目我有跟他聊过，你可以发表文章，你可以用海报来演讲，你可以这样那样，反正他会尽量符合我们亚洲需要就对了，好不好？所以各位这一部分就请各位把握机会而且我不晓得刚刚他们讲到，各位成为他们协会，如果你现在是学生的话，加入是不用钱你如果是已经毕业了，那当然就要钱。就是你是现任的学生，如果对这个有兴趣的话，他都非常欢迎，好不好？大概就比较重点的地方，我会稍微讲几句啦，其他还是用英文这样啪啪啪啪，好不好？好。
Thank you. I'm going to talk today a lot about some growth modeling that I've done. I will also introduce to you a precision feeding system. That's really the sweet spot that Dr. Lee and I found together. It's a technology that has tremendous potential for application in a research environment and also in industry. And we're exploring, this is all about exploring the opportunity to collaborate with the scientists in the room, but also to potentially develop a manufacturing supply chain in collaboration with Taiwan. And I will talk a little bit about some of the opportunities with precision feeding, but there's no time to get into probably all of the things that you have questions on. So I do invite you to come up to me and ask me questions at the end, or ask questions in the group setting. I hope that that we can go deep in the areas that you're interested in. So I'll just tell a little bit about myself. I grew up on a pig farm, so I love pork, and I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Alberta, a master's degree at the University of Alberta, my PhD at the University of Alberta, and I work at the University of Alberta. My father and mother both immigrated from the Netherlands, and they said when they immigrated to Canada, they said Canada is the land of opportunity. So I've often thought about my opportunities to go to different places, but I've tried to honor my father and mother's vision that the opportunities lay in Canada. And for me, that has definitely been true. And I hope to maybe expand those that I work with around the globe. But my roots are firmly in Canada now. So I did my master's in broiler breeder management. I've been working with broiler breeders, the parents of meat-type chickens, for almost 30 years. Actually, almost 30 years. That's a long time. When I graduated with my master's degree, I worked for the provincial government. So we have the country of Canada. Canada has 10 provinces. One of them is Alberta. I worked for the Alberta government. And I did research and extension work. So sharing the results of research and trying to improve the practices, the technologies that the industry was using based on science. While I was working there, I did my PhD because I wanted to develop a model that would take the complexity of biology and put it into an economic context. So I did what I called a bioeconomic model of the broiler chicken supply chain. And much of what I'm going to tell you about today really stemmed from that early work. In 2009, I had an opportunity to become a professor at the University of Alberta, and along with that comes a wonderful opportunity to have alumni, students that I've taught formerly throughout the world. This is not the first time someone has come up to me and said, "I took your class. many years ago, and it's always a joy to see you again. The last 10 years or so, I have spent on precision feeding. I have developed a precision feeding system along with a local engineer who is an absolutely phenomenal partner. His name is Mark Fedorak, and he works in a company called Zenantech. He's the CEO and president of Zenantech. And what we're trying to do is to feed the right bird, the right amount of the right feed at the right time, right? Precision agriculture is about applying the right input to the right place at the right time so that you minimize waste and maximize productivity and profitability, and you have the most sustainable carbon and environmental footprint as well. I am going to show you a video, and the reason I want to show you the video is, one, video tells you a lot with your eyes that I can't communicate as quickly. It's also very hard for me to stay focused, so I would go all over the place, and it would probably take me 7 minutes instead of the 2.5 minutes that this video will take to run. So this is an introduction to my precision feeding system. And I will show you, or I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of my presentation, but I wanted to introduce it to you now. So this is the system. The precision feeding system was developed by our team at the University of Alberta in partnership with Zenantech Technologies. The system was designed to feed individual free-run broiler breeders the right amount of feed at the right time. Our goal was to perfect flock uniformity, and we've achieved that. We routinely see body weight coefficients of variation of 1% at 22 weeks of age. That means that 98% of the birds are within 3% of the average body weight. Here's how the system works. A bird with a unique RFID tag embedded in its wing band enters the feeding station. The RFID tag is read to identify which individual bird is inside. If the bird weighs less than the target body weight, we feed it for a short time. In this video, the hen has access to 12 grams of feed and she has 60 seconds to eat it. After 1 minute is up, she'll be ejected from the feeding station. If a bird weighs more than the target body weight, the station ejects it from the first chamber, and once removed, the entry door opens again to allow another bird to try to qualify for a meal. Although it depends on how much the bird moves around, the system typically weighs birds to within 5 grams. The feeder weighs to within 0.1 grams. By weighing the feed before and after a feeding bout, we know exactly how much the bird eats. The feeding station allows birds to eat several meals per day, rather than 1 meal per day, or even 1 meal every other day in conventional systems. At 4 weeks of age, pullets start eating around 2 to 3 meals per day. Hens typically eat 10 or more meals per day. The size of the meal and the duration can be set by the user. In this way, we can manage the number of meals we provide. Time-stamped data from every visit is recorded in a database, including body weight, the feed intake if the bird gets a meal, and the identity of the bird. The green LED light allows birds to enter any time of day, even when the main house lights are off. We've conducted research that confirms we can use this light to stimulate the eyes, but not the deep brain photosensors. This way, we don't interfere with the bird's long-term reproductive potential. We've developed a second-generation feeding station that can tailor the diet to the nutrient requirements of individual birds. This will revolutionize the ability of the poultry research community to conduct more impactful research, and the poultry industry to produce poultry in an increasingly socially responsible way. Over the next years, we anticipate this approach will revolutionize not only poultry research, but the way the world feeds the parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents of the broiler chicken. So I hope you have questions. Let's save the questions until a little bit later, till I'm finished. But if you are a researcher, I hope you're inspired about the types of research that you could do with a system like this. I will talk at the end of my presentation about a great value proposition for industry. Yeah, the point of this visit is to try to explore opportunities for precision feeding adoption around the world. Okay, so in the context in which the system was developed was this bioeconomic modeling. How many of you love mathematics? How many of you hate mathematics? Okay, how many of you think that mathematics might be useful? Okay, and how many of you think that if you understand the use and someone explains it to you, you could probably use it too? Yeah. So I'm gonna try to make this accessible. So I'm gonna show you some equations that when you look at them, you might go, you probably have the same reaction as what I have when I look at Chinese characters. I find it overwhelming. I can't read it. But let's think about what the mathematics actually can do for us. And I think that will be a motivation to make it, to apply it in our lives. Okay, so I wanted to develop a supply chain model. A supply chain, of course, is the linked enterprises that produce a product. And the product that I was focused on was chicken meat. So chicken farming, feed mills, hatchery, broiler breeders, even parent stock, feed mills that provide feed to each step along the chain where chickens are fed. So the point was, I was an extension agent for the government, and I really wanted a tool that would help me understand and communicate what-if scenarios. So what if we use different genetics? What if we use a different bird to grow for chicken meat? What if we fed them differently, so nutrition? What if they were exposed to different environments? And by linking all of that to costs and profits, I could communicate how valuable, how important it might be from an economic standpoint to adopt that technology, or to say, no, not for me at this time. So that's really the context in which I was working. Now, to do that, if you're manufacturing parts for an automobile, that's pretty straightforward and easy, because you're using metal which has very tight specifications, and you have maybe a little bit of variation, but in biology, variation is huge. You're working with life, with living organisms that are subject to exposure to harsh environments that can affect their performance, their nutrition, their health status. All of those things are challenges that can come up. So I wanted to develop a model that incorporated that living organism. So what happens when we do different things with a chicken? Certainly I have a long ways to go before I'll be satisfied with this model, but that's really where I'm going with it. So the approach was, Jerry Emmons had a paper that he published way back in 1981 where he described the growth of an animal that was unconstrained and sigmoidal. So a sigmoidal curve is just an S-shaped curve. And that describes the growth of many populations, many individuals, and it's a very useful equation. This is what's called the Gompertz equation. The Gompertz equation, in a slightly different form, was published back in 1825. And for those of you who hate math, do you love computers? Because they'll do math for you, right? To me, it is mind-blowing how smart some people were hundreds of years ago, before they had computers to help. It took me about 4 years to really understand how this growth model worked, and I just marvel at someone having the ability to describe an equation like this so many years ago, before computers, and being able to visualize what's going on. So, okay, so this equation is nice because it describes a sigmoidal growth curve, and it has biologically relevant parameters. So G here is the gain, or if there's just one phase of growth, it's the mature weight, it's the asymptote, it's the largest weight to which that animal will grow. So that's a useful concept. If you have multiple phases, which I'll talk about later, then that's the amount of gain that happens in that phase, okay? Then we have a double exponential. So one of those exponentials is causing the increase, and the other one is causing the decrease in the rate, okay? And then we have B, which is a rate coefficient, and then we have I, which is the inflection point, or the age at which the gain is the maximum. So the gain is increasing at an increasing rate, and then it finally starts to slow down. The point where it changes from increasing to decreasing, that's called the inflection point. So we define really where on the time axis, on the age axis, that gain occurs. This is data from Aviagen, their ROS 308 performance objectives for females, the lowest one here, males on the top, and mixed sex birds. And we can describe, or we can derive coefficients for the Gompertz model that will describe these growth curves. And I usually use SAS, but you could use R, you could use Python, you could use even Excel. And I'm going to show you how I do it in Excel. And I hope that you might find this to be useful. So this might be a little bit small, but up on the top here, you can see the equation. That is the Gompertz equation. That is in the cell that's describing the expected body weight. So the expected body weight is the body weight that the model predicts. The coefficients, G, B, and I, are in the spreadsheet here. We have a column for age in days. I usually do it in weeks, but this example shows age in days. So that'll give us a rate coefficient. So instead of a per day rate, it'll be a per week rate. And you can do this in grams or kilograms. I usually use kilograms, but here I've used grams. Okay, so that sort of shows you the context. The body weights that are in the performance objectives are in this column, and they're described by this these blue dots. And then the expected body weight is the black line. I've just used some starting guesses at what the curve, what coefficients might describe the curve. They don't have to be correct, and you can tweak those by hand if you want and try to make that curve fit more nicely. But better yet, we can use a scientific approach, which is the least squares approach. How does that work? Well, you can see here I've got an SE and an SSE. One is a squared error, and one is the sum of squared errors. So the squared error is the observed minus the expected body weight, all squared. Okay? So we copy that down, and we have a squared error for every day, and that describes how far, well, it's a measure of how far we are from the correct value, or the actual observed value. Then the sum of squared errors is just the sum of all of those squared errors. Funny how that works, right? The name is pretty descriptive. And then we can use Solver, which is built right into Excel, to minimize the sum of squared errors. So the sum of squared errors is identified here. So the objective is to minimize the sum of squared errors by changing variable cells G, B, and I. Okay? So then when you click OK, you get new values for the coefficients, and look at how well they describe that curve. You can't even see the black line, which is now buried underneath those blue points. So it's a great way, just an example of how you can use that approach in Excel. I know some of your students might find that intriguing and might want to try that. Okay, so this solution can be used to estimate body weight at any age, and that's really important because if you're doing what-if scenarios, one of the big questions you're going to have if you're producing chicken is what's the best age to market my chicken, right? So what size will they be? What will the yield parameters be? All that kind of stuff. So that's really useful. It can also be used to solve coefficients for any mathematical function. So whether it be an egg production curve if you're working with breeders, whether you're looking at yield, or there's unlimited potential for the types of equations. For those of you who are SAS geeks or SAS nerds, it's probably an English joke that won't translate, but SAS has a button that I've put on my door of my office. It says, "The geek shall inherit the earth." The Bible says the meek shall inherit the earth. SAS says the geek shall inherit the earth. I thought that was pretty funny, and maybe that's lost in translation, but if you are a SAS geek or a SAS nerd, here's the code that you could use to describe or to derive coefficients for that model. Okay, so when we do that, these are perhaps a little bit small, but we have coefficients for the female, coefficients for the male. Female is 6 kilos mature weight. That's interesting to think about, right? We're not even close to 6 kilos yet, but it's predicting based on what we can see already that it's going to be around 6 kilos. For males, 6.8 kilos. It gives us a growth rate, and it gives us an inflection point, the time at which the growth is maximum. And the mixed sex flocks, not surprisingly, have coefficients that are sort of in between the males and the females. All of that is making sense. Okay, so that you understand the model a little bit more, I just want to play with what if we change G. So these graphs, or these lines here, show what happens when you change G. So when G is small, you just grow to a smaller body weight. When G is larger, you grow to a larger body weight. Starting out at pretty much the same point, but ending out at different points. What happens if you change I? You basically just shift that curve on the age axis. So the shape of the curve is identical, you just shift it backward or forward. When you vary the coefficient B, the higher the coefficient B, the faster the gain, right? So you compress it both at the front end and the back end around I to a very small range or a very large range. And that has some interesting, that raises some really interesting possibilities in terms of application. Which I won't have time to go into. Okay, so now you know a little bit about growth models. You can also then, once you can predict the weight of an animal, you can also predict how much feed it needs, right? So if you think about the net energy required for maintenance, here's an equation. You can use your body weight in kilograms. Take that to the power 0.7 and multiply that by 100, and that'll get you a pretty close approximation of what your maintenance energy requirement is, your net energy for maintenance. Very useful number. If you're on a diet, you want to eat at least that much. If you're trying to lose weight, you might even go under that for a couple of days, but not too long. If you're eating just at your maintenance requirement, you're going to lose weight, probably, until your heat production, until you're always cold, and then you'll probably be maintaining your weight. At any rate, you can calculate then how much feed, because your energy requirement divided by the dietary concentration of energy gives you a feed intake. And in this example, it's 100 grams per day, which is what you're going to see in various chickens at various stages of their lives. You can also link the value of a carcass to the body weight of the bird. It's actually the same form of equation that we use for allometric, or allometric means that different parts of the body grow at different times relative to the rest of the body as a whole. The gut, for example, grows really quickly early, and then it becomes much smaller as a proportion of body weight as the animal gets older. As the animal gets older, fat increases much more relative to the rest of the body. Breast muscle increases at a higher rate later on in the life of birds. So all of those relationships have been described in various places, and they continue to evolve as primary breeders select for traits of importance for chickens. One example of this, I've got a picture here of chickens in the background. These are chickens from 1957, 1978, and 2005. And we published a paper that describes their growth. These are unselected lines, so it really describes how genetic selection has affected the size of chickens. It's not that we pump chickens full of hormones. It's not that we pump them full of antibiotics. These are birds that were grown in exactly the same environment, and they are very different at 56 days of age. And this particular chart, I know it's hard to read, that shows the pectoralis major weight, or the breast muscle weight. Older lines have a completely different allometric relationship than modern lines. So selection for white meat yield has really changed that equation, or the coefficients for that equation. Okay, it's also important, I think we're going to make the biggest advances in poultry nutrition, in livestock nutrition, in farming, when we start looking at smaller units, right? And when we look at individuals. Every individual has still their own requirements. They are exposed to a unique microclimate. They have different genetic potentials. So stochastic modeling becomes a very interesting tool as well. And what I'm going to show you here is that you can add, so this is the Gompertz equation, but 2g, the coefficient g, we can add a random variable. So every individual in this room might vary in our mature body weight. I didn't plan this, but maybe let's, I would like to invite Dr. Lee to come stand beside me, and maybe we'll illustrate that point. So, so Dr. Lee might have a little bit smaller G plus U. The population, we all have, we share G, but my U is bigger than Dr. Lee's U. Okay, so he has a smaller, probably below 0, so we would subtract a little number from his mature weight. We would probably add something to mine, and when we have this normally distributed variation. Thank you.
May I say something?
You
got scared, right? No, I talk about mathematics. Okay. 各位啊，数学是这样啊，我们都很害怕。我跟你讲，你不用害怕，你只要看到数学是 exponential 的这一种，我跟你讲，这是最漂亮的数学方程式。为什么？会知道吗？因为你微分之后，它还是长这样；你积分之后还是长这样，多漂亮啊！微积分大一啊，应该都有修过吧？你都要微分一次，你要让它等于0，对不对？微分2次，看是大于0还是小于0，你的极大值就跑出来了嘛。那这个只有什么的数学方程式好算，就是 exponential。所以你只要看到这个，你就知道什么，这个就最佳解。所以我们这位 Martin 很厉害，他已经找到这个基资成长的最佳解。因为如果数学方程式太复杂，第一个你要把商业化有困难，你要用 Excel 算更不可能，你用手算会算死你，对不对？ 哦，要微分积分，要取 log， 又要什么了？你怎么玩得了？但是这是多漂亮的数学！你看人类多聪明，18多少年就有人写出这个数学，但是那时候没有工具，没有 Excel， 没有这些软体，所以只能怎样在办公室里面算的乱七八糟的，对不对？对不对？没有人知道。现在有了科技，对不对？有了电脑，现在又有网络，这个东西是不是就可以全球去发展的？也因为这样子的东西，所以很多东西都是因为数学哈，因为这个东西才会触发我们 Martin 老师说，既然有这么漂亮的数学，可不可以在上面玩数学？再来，可不可以算到每一只鸡每一天应该要吃多少的量，还有它的成分等等之类，最后才会发展出那个什么 black box， 就鸡只饲养那个黑箱子嘛，那才有机会。今天我们就说来跟他合作啊。台湾厉害在哪里？半导体制造啊，对不对？啊，这个胡思乱想的事就让他们去做啊。我们把系统给做出来，对不对？啊，共同来卖全球，这不是很漂亮的东西吗？所以这是今天啊弄这个研讨会另外一个目的啊。what I say is all perfect about you, OK？
谢谢。Okay, so bottom line is that individuals differ according to their genetics, but also according to environment, and we can model all of that. So what I did was I modeled the difference between, I used a value for the male, Ross 308, and I used the same rate of maturing and the inflection point, and then modeled a population that varied with a coefficient of variation of 8%. Bottom line is, look at this this distribution of body weights. Not every bird is the same, right? That means that not every bird has the same nutrient requirements. That means that we might benefit from being able to feed individuals according to their nutrient requirements as they're occurring. This is showing difference in growth that's dependent on genetics. You can imagine that we can extend this to environmental factors, nutritional factors, and health factors, and so on. So I won't get into too much detail. This is just Dr. Lee down here, and this is me up here. So this is U. The random component is either very big or very small. And this is G plus U, so that the numbers here are just different. It's the same normal distribution. Okay, well, it turns out that if you're modeling a meat type animal, like a pig or a cow, or sorry, I should say maybe a steer or a chicken for meat, then one phase of growth is fine. But when you're looking at animals that are more mature and reproducing, then you have to modify your growth model. And what we have found is that a multiple phases works really well. What does that look like? Well, it's very simple. It's exactly the same equation, but we sum up 3 phases. So some of you may be very familiar with the idea of a pubertal growth spurt, right? When boys and girls become adults, they suddenly increase their growth rate. The same thing happens in almost every animal. There is a growth spurt that's different from the initial growth curve, but it follows the same kind of pattern that the first curve followed. So all we need to do to describe that curve is we have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 covers approximately the first 16 weeks. Phase 2 covers the puberty time period, and phase 3 is the post-pubertal time period. And these are the coefficients that describe a broiler breeder hen growth trajectory. So this is a female broiler breeder target body weight curve. And you can see that the coefficients that are shown there nicely describe the dots they fit really well, the dots. So there's 1.7 kilograms of gain in the first phase. There's 1.9, almost 2 kilograms of gain in phase 2, which is the pubertal growth phase. There's a smaller amount of gain in the third phase. So we can describe a broiler breeder growth curve as well. Well, now let's get to something a little bit more interesting. We can actually use these coefficients to think about defining growth trajectories that might be different than what we're currently using, and to try to find an optimum. So what if we manipulated those coefficients? Some of our work with precision feeding, we found that by increasing the number of times we fed chickens in a day, they became much leaner, and actually a lot of them never started laying eggs. Feed restriction in broiler breeders, the target body weights for broiler breeder hens has not changed very much over the last 40 or 50 years. And so they're becoming more and more severely feed restricted, and their fat level in their body is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And what we showed with some of our initial work with precision feeding was that just by changing how often we fed the birds, we could change their carcass fat. So if you feed a little meal many times, there's never an excess, and that excess never goes to fat. It goes to the cells that are screaming, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, feed me. And so by feeding many meals, those cells get the nutrients, and not much of it is stored away into fat. And we saw that hurt reproduction. So what we want to do is increase, if we want to increase fat deposition to ensure that pullets can be coming into lay, well, what would happen if we increased gain in the first phase, or increased gain in the second phase, or shifted gain from the first phase to the second phase, or from the second phase to the first phase? What happens if we move the timing of the second phase earlier? So there are so many interesting possibilities. When we were designing an experiment to run with Aviagen, my PhD student and I, this was during the COVID-19 shutdown, so we couldn't run the research, we had a little bit of time. We met with Aviagen weekly for about 16 weeks, just discussing possibilities of different growth curves that we could implement in an experiment. And we decided on some, and I'll show you just a few results from that. So one of the things was variations of the pubertal phase, or the second phase of growth. So you can see here that the growth can be, oops, that's a terrible line. The growth can be delayed, or the growth can be a little bit earlier. And that might have some implications for how much fat gets deposited, because these birds down here are going to be quite severely feed restricted. They're not going to have much fat in their body. These ones at a similar age are much heavier in body weight, so they might have more fat. And indeed, we did find some interesting things. So what this shows is just changing that one parameter, that one, the value of the coefficient I2. This would be changing the value of G2, right? So in this case, we end up with birds that are at different weights. On the I2, it's interesting that they all come back to the same mature weight, because G1 plus G2 plus G3 never changed. In this case, because we're changing G2, those birds end up at different weights on maturity. Okay, so that's another option. So putting it to practical use, we actually made some decisions around what we would use, and we were able to not only define these curves, but to implement them almost perfectly to the time of sexual maturity. using our precision feeding stations. So this again shows the growth curve. That's the standard that's recommended, or that was recommended. This research has already changed Aviagen's recommendations for body weight of their hens. We used 6 different pubertal phase inflection points, so that's very similar to what I just showed you. From 15 weeks to 23 weeks, we varied the inflection point, the timing, and we also had 2 shifts of gain from the second phase to the first phase. This shows 0% shift, so there was no shift, and we also had a 20% shift. So 20% of the gain that happened in the second phase, we shifted to the first phase. Because we never changed the total amount of gain, they all ended up at the same body weight, they just got there in different ways. And how did that affect their bodies? In profound ways. So this was very interesting work. These are the actual body weights of each of the birds on each of the treatments. And to the time that egg production started, we had a very, very tight adherence. We were able to feed the birds exactly to what the target body weight that we were aiming at. That would be very difficult to do in a conventional system. But you can see how tight each of these treatments is to the line that was the target for that group. Once they start laying eggs, they change their priorities, and then we often see birds that get less than the target body weight, which is up here, but they're never allowed to get heavier than the target body weight. So a bird that's down here is happily going along with no feed restriction during the laying period, and that's okay because she's not too heavy. She's probably laying a lot of eggs, so it's good for her to eat as much as she needs. So all sorts of interesting stories we can tell. This is carcass fat at 22 weeks. Now, we often think of the x-axis as being age. X-axis here is not age. It's the age at which the inflection point occurred. So the green symbols here are, actually this one. The green symbols here are the birds that grew fast early, okay? So when they grew fast early, they were in fact fatter at 22 weeks of age. When they grew fast early, they actually laid their first egg at a younger age, right? So they came into lay more quickly. That's a good thing, because we were seeing before that birds were not coming into lay. In fact, look at when we have birds growing much more slowly, or they're growing later. Their age at first egg was higher, so they didn't come into lay as quickly, and their fat was also lower. And it's because of that low fat that they weren't coming into lay. So very interesting stuff. Egg production to 59 weeks. When we grew the birds early, that's when we got the most eggs and the most chicks. So this is really quite interesting, because now we can use these types of numbers. They're continuous numbers, so we can use them to find an optimum, right? This is pretty linear still, so there might not be a place where we have a maximum, but we could find a maximum if it exists. If we go far enough backwards, I'm sure that the positive benefits of growing early might outweigh some of the benefits. So, okay, chick production to 59 weeks I've already talked about. Okay, I'm almost through here. I want to show you a story. This is data from one bird, and this is where you researchers might get excited, I hope. This is an enormous amount of data that can be used for artificial intelligence. this is great data. I wish I had this data when I was first developing my models during my PhD. I never had anything as rich as this. But this shows the body weight. So the target body weight is the blue line, which is hidden in most places by the green dots. The green dots are actually measured body weights. Every time a bird comes into the feeding station, its body weight is recorded to a database. So those are all plotted here, and they're all plotted with these different types of events. I'm not going to get into what those are, but we can troubleshoot, and we can. One of the really interesting ones, I'm not sure if we can zoom in. I don't think so. Oops. But one of the things that's really interesting is early on, and sometimes when there's an issue, the bird will jump out of the feeding station without eating feed, or before it's done eating its meal. And we keep track of all that. And the bird will do some really interesting things. This particular bird stopped eating for 2 days. So right in this area, she stopped eating. I said to my students and staff, go look at that bird. What's wrong with that bird? Because she's not eating and she's starting to lose weight. The next day, or that day, they came back to me and said, I don't know, she looks good. But when we put her into the station, she just jumps out, right? So that's the bales, the blue hash mark. That means that the bird jumped out of the station and didn't eat. So the next day, it didn't eat. And I said, come on, something's got to be wrong with this bird. They said, oh, her feathers are fluffed up a little bit, but she doesn't look bad. And I said, well, keep an eye on her. They tried to put her in the station, she bailed again. The next day, lost more weight. And I said, guys, what's going on with this bird? They said, she looks good, she looks normal. I have no idea what's going on. So the data was telling us something is up with this bird, and I do believe something was up with that bird. We just never diagnosed it. We never brought a veterinarian in to diagnose what was going on. But all of a sudden, she seemed to just pick up, and she started to eat again, and she continued as though maybe there's a little bit of a drop in the trajectory, but it's almost like nothing happened. I wonder how many times this goes on in a commercial flock, where who knows what's going on with individuals, because we're just looking at the flock average. We would have never picked up something like this. So what I want to show you is some insights from real-time data. So we don't see that data until afterwards, right? Afterwards, we can sort of look at what's happening. So I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what happens from day to day. We get an update. Now, I'm not going to make you wait a day for every update. There's going to be 5 days for every second. So this is going to come in pretty quick. But I want you to sort of see what is the data, how does the data change as the data is compiled. So there we go, growing. Beginning of the day, they're much smaller weight than, oh wait, what happened there? That's where the bird stopped eating. So every day we get an update like this, and we can see what's going on. And every bird has a crazy story to tell. Not a crazy story. Some of them have crazy stories to tell, and some of them are kind of boring. What's really cool, now that you know something about growth modeling, is that we've got a nice sigmoidal curve for phase 1 here, and you can just see, this is from 2 days ago that I generated this graph. This bird is just starting its pubertal growth spurt. And in fact, 3 days ago, we got our first egg. 3 or 4 days ago, we got our first egg, and we're up to about 50% production already. They're coming in like blazes. Interesting. Now, I'm just going to wrap up with a little bit of story about a commercial opportunity that comes from precision feeding. And I've focused a lot on the female I've studied the broiler breeder female for my entire career. So, how many of you know the word serendipity? Serendipity means a fortunate surprise. How many of you know about the discovery of penicillin? So there was a bacteria growing, and someone left their bread, their lunch out over the weekend, and the bread started to mold, and the Aspergillus spores ended up on the petri dish, and there was this little circle where there's no growth of bacteria. That's how they discovered antibiotics. That's a fortunate surprise. So my fortunate surprise was we were growing, because we wanted to look at not only egg production, but chick production. We had males with the females in the pen. And every time we ran an experiment, our fertility was much higher in our precision-fed birds, and we never had to spike them. So spiking, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, is when you have to replace males because they're too heavy or too light, and they're not completing their matings, and that's a huge economic cost. So you have to replace those males. So males on target body weight have more successful matings. We were seeing 3.8 to 6% higher fertility in our precision feeding treatments. So the value proposition is that we can expect higher fertility with less labor, with less replacement costs for all the males we don't have to place. And in addition, because birds eat more frequently during the day, they're actually more feed efficient. They don't have to store and mobilize nutrients. And anyone of you who's taken chemistry knows that when you change the chemical composition back and forth, you always lose energy, right? So they're more efficient as well. So it works out to Canadian $65. So I think it's 24 Canadian or 24 new Taiwan dollars to a Canadian dollar. So multiply that number by 24 and you get a Taiwan estimate. Now I'm making assumptions for Canada, so I'm not sure that it works out the same. On the right, you'll see when we precision feed the males, how tightly they adhere to that target body weight, and with the females, with the conventionally fed males, they're not nearly as uniform. Hatchability in North America, I'm not sure what it's like in Taiwan or anywhere else in Asia for that matter, but fertility has been dropping over the last decade in Canada and in the US, and that has huge economic impact on the industry. So precision feeding is one way that we want to try to increase fertility around the world. Could Taiwan be one of the first to adopt precision feeding for poultry? Maybe in academia, maybe in industry. I would love to have conversations with you. Perhaps there's an opportunity for us to collaborate in the manufacturing. You guys, Donald Trump mentions Taiwan as the cheapest chips. Those chips are so cheap in Taiwan. You guys are good at what you do, and for that reason, I think it would be wonderful to potentially work with you. We'll see what happens in the supply chain politics in the next little while, but this is one of the big reasons why I'm here, is to try to explore this. I've got my electronic business card there, so you can scan that if you like the QR code. And if we have time, I would love to take some questions. Thank you. 谢谢.
哦，各位，这个很难得哦，全盘演出哦，没有任何隐瞒哦，从数学讲到系统，对吧？